What's up guys, Jared back with another one for you, but switching gears a little bit this time from all the flagship device coverage lately and dipping a little bit into the Chinese smartphone market. This is the Elephone P6000. Now first off, the price tag does speak quite clearly to the capabilities and hardware packed into this phone. That said though, depending on where you get yours, for $125, mine of course came from pandagrill.com, shameless plug I know. It comes with a decent 5-inch 720p display. In some instances though, certain images like some app icons for example, will remind you pretty quickly that it's still only a 720p display. But to be perfectly honest, for a $125 phone, it has a fairly well color calibrated display. What's funny though is that in the display settings, there's an option called Mirror Vision, and it allows you to do some pretty in-depth display calibration for a smartphone screen. But that's not the funny part. The funny part is that no matter how much I tried, I couldn't achieve a better color mix than the default factory calibration when comparing the results with the display tester app I use. So personally, I recommend just leaving it on the default settings. Now, with regards to the design, I actually kind of like it. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still plastic as hell feeling, but it's actually one of the more solid feeling Chinese smartphones I've held. But it does still creak and crackle around the edges, and that might be because the backing can actually be removed to access the 2700 mAh removable battery. Unfortunately though, Elephone didn't make it easy for us to take off, but at least the option's there. Now another unfortunate design choice is the long speaker grille on the back of the phone, which leads you to believe it's a big speaker when in fact it's only about half the size. Both of our physical buttons are located on the right side of the device, with the top being the volume rocker and the power button just underneath. And I mean just underneath, as in it's a tad bit too close and I kept hitting the volume down button when trying to wake the phone, so it might just take a bit of getting used to if you do end up buying one. Other than that, 3.5mm auxiliary port at the top and your micro USB at the bottom, and of course, both cameras where they should be. The capacitive buttons though are a bit different than what I'm sure many of you are used to. So both back and menu buttons have no icons indicating what they are, so that's up to you to figure out. And they don't have backlights, so using the phone in the dark can tend to be a tiny bit challenging. But the home button, which doubles as the recent tasks button, is a brightly lit blue circle which also pulses when notifications arrive, which I think looks quite charming if I do say so myself. Software wise, we're looking at Android 4.4.4 KitKat, which I've actually been a little disappointed with because believe it or not, I've had this phone for several months. Back when I picked it to review, Elephone was basically advertising it as coming with Android 5.0 Lollipop out of the box, but what I missed was the fine print that said, coming later this year. Anyways, long story short, they're still working on the Lollipop update, which will come over the air, which is nice. And I can confirm that the over-the-air system does in fact work because I've had a few over-the-air updates since I've had it in my possession. Now, the phone does come rooted, and Elephone has a forum where they offer the latest Lollipop ROM build. So if you wanted to, you could very easily flash Lollipop and be fully up to date. Just keep in mind, it's still a beta build. Anyways, Elephone's skin is very similar feeling to other phones in the Chinese smartphone market. Very minimalistic, not a whole lot of bells and whistles, which keeps overall system performance running nicely. And they've done a fantastic job at universally integrating English and other languages into the system. Like for example, as I navigate around the device, there's no random Chinese characters anywhere. And I know you guys are going to appreciate this. The app drawer is Chinese bloatware app free, and with so little running in the background, like I mentioned a moment ago, performance is more than satisfactory. It's rocking a quad-core MediaTek MT6732, which may not be MediaTek's latest and greatest, MT6752, but it still scores a satisfactory 32,146 on Antutu. It also has a decent 2 gigs of RAM and a Mali T760 GPU, which is actually the same family that Samsung's Galaxy S6's GPU is from, except the S6's is the T760 MP8. But the T760 will still be more than enough to play any game that you're willing to play on a 720p display. Now, when it comes to the rear 13 megapixel camera, the origin of which I couldn't find, the level of detail is pretty decent, but pretty much lacks everywhere else, as expected when paired with a phone that has the price tag it does. Colors can get quite flat and washed out, as you can see with the yellow in this Ferrari's badge, and the exposure was pretty hard to nail down in landscape type scenes, and low light indoor shots are really bad with plenty of noise all over the image. It does all right outside for the most part, but there were times when the focus was sort of all over the place. The interface is the same standard interface for a lot of Chinese phone cameras, with plenty of scene options and actually a fair amount of manual controls. The front cam is a 2 megapixel shooter. It's really nothing fancy, and quite honestly, there really isn't much to say about it other than it takes decent enough selfies and has that beauty mode for making you look prettier than you really are. And finally, the 2700 milliamp hour battery puts up a pretty good fight in day-to-day tasks, actually. In fact, because it's only powering a 720p display on a phone with little to no bloatware and no bells and whistles, standby time is phenomenal. And if you're just using it for light daily tasks like texting, browsing the web, and phone calls, you'll be plugging it in at the end of the day with about 40 to 50% battery left, which is exactly what I experienced. Now, playing games though seems to push that Mali T760 GPU pretty hard and consequently drains the battery really fast. However, during my testing, watching video content from 100% to about 15% battery, I was able to achieve 4 hours and 36 minutes of screen on time with display brightness at about 50%, Wi-Fi and GPS on, as well as 2 Gmail accounts pulling in emails and such, which I think is pretty darn good. So there you have it, another great mid-range phone from the Chinese smartphone market. For 125 bucks, it's got fantastic build quality, a pretty decent 720p display, though I think they could have gotten away with a 1080p panel and still kept the price down. It may fall short in the camera department, but makes up for it with its overall day-to-day performance, removable battery, and expandable storage. Now, the Wi-Fi and data radios are strong, but the Bluetooth radio is a bit weak and lowers the quality of audio when listening to music. And unfortunately, the various audio enhancement settings, not to mention the lossless Bluetooth audio mode, fixes pretty much nothing. For the $125 price tag, it's a pretty decent mid-ranger, but there are plenty of other options, and I think, depending on what you want out of a phone, potentially better options for around the same price. And that's the beauty of the Chinese smartphone market. There's tons of options for you to choose from. Anyways, I'll have a link to pandawheel.com, which is where mine came from, for pricing and availability, and I'll also have a discount code that pandawheel.com gave to me to pass along to you guys. But that's it for this one. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll talk to you all in the next one. Cheers.